Hi, what's up? I see people joining. So there are these names which I'm acquainted with, some names which are new to me. So those who don't know me, I am Pooja Sharma, and I'll be the anchor for today's seminar. And yeah, I too am a student like most of you, an architecture student, and one of my greatest dilemmas while designing is the process of concept development. Yeah, so I hope that we are sailing in the same boat. And why this awkward silence? There's no point in making this awkward conversation. So let's break the ice with some chit chat. So basically, we have some questions for you. These are like personal opinion questions, and you will be given options, and you will just have to choose your opinion through the polling. At the bottom right corner of your screens right now, you can see the option for polling. And yeah, let's get started. Okay. So the first question is, when do you generally start developing a concept for your project? At the beginning, in the process, or after the design? Just check the option which you feel is more like you.
I think
Okay.
as students we used to do it after the design, and as professionals,
Yeah. We just make the design and look at it,
yeah,
whatever it's looking like.
then something comes up. So, but as a professional, I think we have to do it at the beginning, and then it becomes a process.
Yeah. Okay, so the audience seems to go with in the process option. Very well. The next question is, what is your source of inspiration for the concepts? Brainstorming, discussion, or our all-time favorite, Pinterest? Hey, be honest, huh? Okay. I can see 4 votes to brainstorming and 3 to Pinterest. Okay.
There is a competition between brainstorming and Pinterest.
Yeah, seems like that.
Those who have joined late, we are actually doing a poll on just personal based questions. So you can see an activity box on the rightmost bottom part, and there you can see polls. So you can access through the questions and you can vote, and it's just a quick activity. So be very much participative in this. Let's see which option is better for everyone. Okay, we have the third question. Pooja,
The third question says, do you at all believe that concept is mandatory for a good design? So yeah, this can be very interesting to know your opinion. Okay, we already have a winner. 11 votes for, 12 votes for yes. Okay. Next, at what stage of designing do you generally implement the concept? The planning stage, or where you develop the form, or the third where you only know what your concept is after you finish designing? Something tells me it's the third option for most of us. Let's see. Planning, they say. Good. Okay, so the fifth question is here. Do your concept always fit in while you're designing? So you also need to be very honest with this one. The options are always just perfect. Concept seems nice theoretically, but on paper it's weird. And yeah, sometimes it fits. Or the last option says, I don't believe in concepts. So yeah, we would like to know what's your opinion on this. I'd go with the second one. Seems like the second one's the winner. 11 votes. Okay, the sixth question is, what concepts are you into? Theoretical, philosophical, practical, or function comes first for you? There's a tie between philosophical and function comes first. Next question again is the debate between form and function. Form follows function or the function follows form. Yeah, so the age old debate. What do you think? Okay, that's a tie. Concept, what do you think? Is it necessity or just luxury? Okay, good. I like it that most of you feel it's necessary. Nice. And the ninth question is, what according to you is a concept? Contextual or ideological? Nice. So I see contextual is the common opinion here. Yes. Okay. And lastly, the very important question, are you excited for the seminar? Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all we have for now. And it was great interacting with you all. So I think, yeah, it's about time that we counter the conceptual paradox. So a very good morning to you all, and I welcome you all again to this seminar. And before we get started, I would like to notify you with some basic instructions you need to follow, including please keep your devices on mute throughout the seminar. And whatever doubts, queries, or questions you have, or in general, any conversation you would like to have with Sir, can be addressed in the latter half of the seminar, that is in the Q&A session, which is specially designed for your questions and queries. And in between the presentation, if you feel like saying something, please feel free to hit up the comment box. Yeah, that's it, I guess. So let's get started. I think, yeah, sir.
I should share the screen or you have it?
No, I'll just introduce
Okay.
them and then we'll get started. Okay. So I think architecture students in general are like pretty tough. We can go days and nights with minimal sleep. We can do 6 months worth of work in that one hectic final week before the deadline. And yeah, we can, ladies and gentlemen, do it all. However, Superman has kryptonite too. And ours is a question. What is your concept? Yeah, and that question haunts not only the students, but the professionals too. So it's a bit of a thing which we all worry about. But don't worry, because today we have Sir Swapnil Valvatkar with us for rescue, and whom today you know as a successful architect and the founder of Collage Architect Studios from Bangalore, was once a student too, just like you and me. He was a young boy from Goa studying at Goa School of Architecture and had millions of dreams and millions of struggle coming up with the perfect ideal concept, just like Sir had told us once. And then he met his mentor who helped him break through the stereotypical concepts which were there. And then they actually understood what a concept exactly is. It's an approach, a deep-rooted thought you need to give to your design. And with such strong foundations and his extraordinarily creative mind and of course his undiverted passion for the field of architecture. Today, Sir has executed so many successful projects, including IT parks, research and development centers, residential complexes, international schools, to name a few. And also, he has worked with so many brilliant minds till date. And sir, I must say we are so honored to have you here. And before I hand over the mic to you, I wanted to say that we are really inspired by your incredible life journey. It's a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, yeah, it's indeed a privilege to be here because this question, concept has been a paradox for me right from my school. So as I said, most of us as students, I think would find it strange that we would not have a concept. We would start on something, and and then eventually, by the time you have your presentation, or for maybe your final presentation, is when the thing would come up. What's your concept? And you would quickly overnight sketch something and say, "Oh, this is a concept." And invariably, to be fair enough, our concepts used to be birds, trees, you know. I remember dogs, and there were a lot of things which came up during my college time. I mean, if I can go on and on, and I can have a full session of what were the amazing and hilarious concepts that came in during our 5 years. So nobody ever told us, told us what a concept really meant. And I think it's only after practice, and then when you start seeing your project going through the whole process of design to execution, is when you realize how deep the meaning of concept is. I mean, it's a search which is still going on for me or a firm in terms of to label concept in one line. And I think that search will go on till probably you close your architectural practice as well. So don't worry. I mean, I don't think you guys should feel scared. Don't be nervous, or don't think that you lack something. If somebody tells you, oh, you don't have a idea of what your concept is, it will be developed. So it will be developed over a period of time. It depends on your language. It depends on what kind of work you like, what kind of work you do, what kind of client you meet. So of course, I always uh, we used to always discuss with Mohe and all of us in our sessions. Mohe used to always say one thing. He said that if Korea didn't have the clients that he had got, probably Korea wouldn't have been Korea himself. So even to a large extent of your practice and developing your concepts, you need some kind of a backbone behind you to push you, and that's always the client, the budget, the sites. So a lot of things come into play. So I'll start sharing the PPT, and then probably as we after we end, we can have a question and answer session. Yeah. So I represent Collage Architecture Studio. We are three partners who started this firm after after working in Mindspace and CNT for almost 8 to 9 years. And that's the topic itself. I mean, I was told concept paradox. I thought the best way to put it is concept is a paradox. And when I say look at it as paradox means a myth. So is it a myth, or is there a reality, or it is a combination of a reality and a myth? Or if I would rather, if you have to look at the journey itself, then it's a myth which starts off with the design, and then as your project ends, it's a reality. So that's probably the journey of concept. So I was just as I was going, I was going to present this. I really wanted to find a dictionary meaning to concept, and I tried finding, and each of these dictionaries had a varied meaning. So I started with Oxford, and this is what it gave me: an abstract idea or a plan or intention. I mean, it's not architectural, but it's just a general definition of what a concept would mean in a dictionary. And then I found I found another dictionary called Willens, and it said something conceived in the mind, a thought or a notion. Or another dictionary said it's an abstract or generic idea generalized from particular instances of psychology or concepts of gravity. And I myself was amazed that the definition of concept itself has so many concepts. So that was really something which baffled me even now. I mean, after knowing going through this whole process of an architectural journey. So I actually broadly put it as what is it that starts your design. So I thought first one is inspiration, and what do we get generally inspired with? We get inspired with nature, we get inspired with people, we get inspired with culture, we get inspired with color, we get inspired with textures. So there are a lot of things that which we start getting inspired with, and then our architecture also starts getting inspired the same way. So it's just something which you like. So maybe this was a fisheries building in Hyderabad, and it's exactly a replica of the fish. Good, bad, I leave it up to you to decide. But somebody has picked up inspiration and put it on site. And the same way, probably a better way of representing the same inspiration of the fish was seen in this project. The same thing goes to with a dog. And there are various forms, and this has nothing to do with the end user. I'm not even talking about what, I mean, you don't even know what happens inside these buildings, either of them, but they have a form to it. They have a concept which the architect put forward and said, I wanted it to look like a cat, or I wanted it to look like a dog, and this building still exists. So I always looking at this slide always excites me the most, because what you want to see lot depends on what we look for. So this image is something which you could interpret it anyway. So it's almost like an illusion where you are picking up this whole maybe a tube or something from down, but the way it is picked up and the way you perceive it, it could form like a bulb. So that's something which probably a concept is. It's a myth. It's a distance between a myth and a reality. And you really need to know what you need to get inspired by, and how you can go deep rooted in your inspiration, whatever you have found your inspiration in is, and then take it forward as a whole process from the start of your project to the end of a project. So this is something which actually I remember this very clearly, because I had just passed out, and Kevin Marklow was giving a presentation for MASA in Bangalore. And he presented this whole idea of two students who were given to design an aquarium. And one student took the seashell as his or her concept and developed it beautifully. He dissected the seashell, and then he made the whole form out of that whole seashell. And everybody, including the whole jury and everybody, went gaga over it. Till the next student who came in, and he actually did something much more deeper. He studied the sea itself. So he studied how the sea has so many varieties. So you have the calmer sea, you have the turbulent sea, you have underwater plants, you have flora, fauna, you have shallow water, how light penetrates into deep sea, how light penetrates into shallow water. He studied all that, and the project was completely different. So it's about taking the inspiration, and probably taking the inspiration much more deeper is what I was talking about. So that's something which is what probably to me a concept is, or an inspiration where you derive your inspiration for a project is. And it's the same thing with a nest. So when many people, I've seen a lot of buildings which are derived from the nest, and this is the famous building which it's a Beijing Olympic Stadium, and the concept is written as a nest. But no, even this building has refused to find out why or how does the nest actually play a very important role. A nest is a house by itself, and the way it is done, it's not just about the straws which get weaved around each other, but it's again about the material. It's what does this nest do to the inhabitants of the place, and how does it behave contextually, climate wise, and what purpose is it. a nest is like a home or incubation center for the bird to when it starts laying its eggs. And the reason why it builds its nest in this hay is because the heat that it starts generating, the heat which is required for incubating, and the process of incubating itself is enhanced because of the material that is used. One is of course to protect the eggs, because it's laid at a higher level and you need a proper base for it, and that's the only way that they know how to do it. And the next important part is to actually hide it from the predators, the to hide the eggs from the predators. And that's exceptionally a very deep rooted understanding of the nest can only lead to a building which can become much more than much more than just a artificial form of a replication. So as I was going through, and I think part of it was in the question, is so I guess if you had to look at the question, and there was theoretical, there was philosophical, there was function driven, or I think and another option was there. So I actually looked at it slightly differently, and I said, what is a concept, and what are the kinds of concept that you have? All my years, 20 years, I have just heard this, that concepts can be a metaphor, analogy, or an essence, or pragmatic, and ideal. So I will, as I go through, I will just explain what my understanding of this meaning of concepts are in terms of these various segments. And it's the same as what probably questions you were asked. It could be theoretical, it could be philosophical, it could be a replication. So I mean, just the words are slightly different, but it's almost the same. So when I say a metaphor is something which you probably take a object and then try and start looking at it very in deep thought, and get inspired not by just the form. You get inspired by the overall essence of that project, of the image itself, or of the form itself, or of any object. So though Notre Dame was designed as a sailing ship because it was built on a really high hill, and Corbusier's initial conversation, if you even read his book, he talks about how that he thought that on this whole lawn, which was at a higher level, he wanted to actually create this whole ship-like structure. But a lot of people have actually interpreted that same metaphor, and when students go and there are some exercises conducted, they have actually interpreted in many ways. I mean, leave aside the sheep itself, there's hands which are asked, like in the prayer when you pray to God, a bird, and then even in terms of a hat. And each of this could be right until and unless the architect himself has spoken about it. We wouldn't have known it. Just because the architect spoke about it and we know what the real intent of the design was, or where he derived it and how did he derive it from, we could still call it as a metaphor of X and not Y. While this is a direct metaphor, I mean, it's a lotus temple, which is designed like a Baha'i temple, which is designed like a lotus. And the inspiration was, everyone knows it's a lotus. And it's a direct derivation. Everybody knows it's a lotus. Probably that, is something which they used, the form of the lotus they used so well to derive, to kind of create that meditation space, something which calms you down. And the way the petals were arranged, the concrete shells which came, it was as a structure, it's for that time when it was built, it was really revolutionary. And it was a direct interpretation of a particular object, and it set in well given the setting that it was built in. So I have this, like I have a instance of this, because in the second year, when I was in second year, first sem, we were asked to design a model. And I started off with the lotus because we had just gone to Delhi as a trip, and I was so amazed with the structure. I said I'm going to take this concept of a lotus and build my whole hotel in the form of a lotus. We had I think the first jury went well because everybody, all our in-house teachers thought it was a brilliant concept, until Sen Kapadia came in as the next juror, and we had a master class. And I had done a beautiful model of thermocol, or I remember it was cardboard. he just took it and crushed it. And I was like, I was feeling so angry from inside. I could not show it. But eventually, at the end, at 5 o'clock, around after the class was over, I went and I asked him, I said, why did you, trash this model? He's like, if I had not trashed it, you would have done like a trash of a building. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? And then he sat next to me and he said, see, when there's a lotus temple, the idea of a lotus fits in properly. But for a hotel, you can't just take a lotus and build the whole form out of a lotus. It's so superficial. So what he did the next day, and all of us had crazy concepts. I mean, it was not only me. I mean, we had about 40, I would say about 30, 35 crazy concepts, and some of them didn't even have concepts. So on the next day morning, what he did was he said, erase all your designs. He said, let's just study the site. And the site was, it was abutting the Mandovi River or the river. So he said, you just define the edge of that. And what he did was a very simple exercise for us. He said, define the land in a way that you want to see it with any material, and the water with any material in a model with the way you feel water could be. So for example, I took the land and I think I cut a chatai, and to depict the land, I put a chatai on top. And for water, I don't remember what, but I had put some reflection. Yeah. So I had put a glass. So when I went back to him and I started explaining the thing, that's when he told me, see, now you're starting to think differently. There's land, there's water, there's an edge. Now, the land you have started replicating as a chatai, which means that you want to look at it as relaxing component. Water, you started looking at reflection, something that is that you really want people to go and stand next to it and start seeing the reflection of the building or maybe the surroundings onto it. Now, the third one was the next day's exercise. I mean, which was so important for me. Why I'm telling you this incident? Because it was so important for me at an early age to realize, that concepts need not be so much like how we talk about concepts. So he said the next day's exercise is to blur that edge use a material to blur the edge between the land and water. And that really got our design. Eventually, when we did the whole design, it was irrelevant, but we had started developing a nice promenade. We had started, redefining that edge of, instead of it being straight, we brought in steps, we brought in jetties, we ventured into the river a bit. We got the water into the inside our building, and the whole approach of design completely changed. So that's when I really started understanding that concepts are deep-rooted thought processes and not just a mere depiction of any object or inspiration that you have. And to be fair enough to this, Calatrava has been an inspiration because he takes an object, or he takes human, anatomy, or he takes the animal anatomy and starts designing structures which are structurally strong, as well as taken from the essence of that bone structure itself and how the bone structure or the joints start behaving. And that's something which each one of you as students should look forward to, rather than taking just the mere form. So the next part is an analogy. And what's an analogy? Probably analogy is what we all talk about. It's a direct representation of what you want to say. And the face house of Kasumasa Yashmita is very, very common. Or even if you look at Gaudi's work, it is an analogy. So it's like somebody wanted a face on the house and he's just put that same thing. And if you look at the plan of this house, I'm sure you should go and see the plan of this house. It'll be even more interesting. I actually forgot to put the plan, but it's quite interesting to see the plan as well. The second kind of analogy is something which has already been built and you interpret it maybe for a different kind of a structure, and you start interpreting it for a different typology. So on the right hand side, if you see, you have the gallery of which was designed in 1961. It was a public building, And on the left hand side, you have a housing building which has the same analogy in terms of the section, in terms of the even in terms of the proportion and the concept of a street inside has been taken for housing. So which is also a concept, but derived from an already existing kind of a building, which was probably not for the same purpose, maybe for something else. And that analogy works as well in terms of your design concepts. The third one is, of course, the essence. And when I say the essence, it's like something like this. I probably have, if you look at some of this Kaushik Chaudhary's work, and then he had created that rice institute, where the terrain was full of rice fields. I mean, side adjoining. So he really didn't want to build a building there and make it look stand out. So what he did was he did this different terraces and had rice fields actually on top of it. So something similar Woha has done in this building, where they wanted to create almost like a park on top of a terrace, and that's an essence. So they're really looking at green as a essence, or a park as an essence, which takes care of the skyline or the top level of any structure. So this is essence. So it's not like a direct derivation, it's not like a inspiration, it is not a form relevant. It's a idea which is replicated in terms of your building on top of a building, which could be a landscape feature itself. And it's similar to their work in terms of another building, which is a housing building. It's the same building from the other side, where they have the facade is completely different, and what happens inside is completely different. All of us know Kandalama. So when Bawa actually wanted, it was surrounded by hills, and he really didn't want the building again to stand out. So what he did was he built it in such a way that the backside was abutted the hill, and the front he allowed all these creepers to take over. So sometime when you go during the monsoons, or during when the plants have totally covered it up, you really can't see the hotel itself. And it's an amazing section. If you study the section, you will know how amazing the section is, because the backside of the hotel is, there's no wall, it's the rock which forms the rear end of the hotel. So the next one is pragmatic, and I think the best example for us in our lifetime, I mean, as masters, were Doshi and Korea. Their projects were very pragmatic. When I say pragmatic, they are more function driven, with the initial idea, and that idea starts evolving around to put the functions in place. And Korea took the 9 square or the mandala concept to a very different level. And if you see majority of his work, like the 70s or 80s work, he was so much inspired with the mandala that all his buildings fitted so well. And when I say fitted so well, it's more about the function, the way it fitted in so well. So you have an office building which was designed as a mandala, or you have the Bhopal Bhavan, which was again based on the 9 squares, but modified to suit the form, modified to suit the function. So this is more of a pragmatic idea, but overlaid with the function. This is something which probably of late I have started to follow, and this is an ideal concept. When I say ideal concept, it's not an ideal concept, don't take it literally, but I've just named it as ideal. I am sure you have heard of Frey Otto's soap bubble experiments. I mean, if you're students, if you have not heard it, please go and search for him. His structures are amazing, and all the structures are developed with a soap bubble, the form of a soap bubble. So he just transfers the soap bubbles onto a mesh or onto a framework or a wire framework, and allows them to take their own shape. And then he starts designing the structure like that. So this is just one example, and I could go on. I mean, there's some 3-4 of this kind of concept driven, idea driven concepts which come in for the structure. And he starts doing the structures which have this forms, and then later he's developed this for a train station in, I think, if I'm not sure, it's in somewhere in Barcelona, or I'm not sure about the place, but this was the concept that he did, and it came from the whole idea of how the when the soap bubble was put through a ring of framework and allowed to come down, and that's the structure. He has reinforced it with very thin reinforcement, a very uh, uh, different way, a different approach of a design. So yeah, so that gets me to, you know, a little bit of understanding of what concepts were. This was purely what I did in terms of the exercise for the presentation, because I was going to present to you guys, mostly were students. So I felt that, you know, you really understand what are the different types of concepts. So now that we have come to what are different types of concepts, I would like to really show our work in terms of how we do concepts and how each concept starts developing and forming much more better and bigger, and the ideas just starts growing as you end the project, or you start when you start realization of the project. So as students, I mean, all of you are, you know, student, fourth year, fifth year, whatever. As students, you always dream of, you know, being starting your own studio at some point of time. I mean, we have that Josh every time that we want to. So even we had that as students, and at our time, the only 2 or 3 studios were very prominent. This was way back in I'm talking about 96, 97. So very few architecture studios, and one of them was Doshi's, or the other one was Stradavando's, and they were not because they were the only architects, but it was because, you know, if you had to study the way the work was carried out in this offices, it was a very process driven work. So you start with an idea, then that gets developed, nurtured, and then eventually becomes a reality. So that is the reason why we always, you know, aspired to have studios like that. So, you know, then you start practicing. So this image is actually something which I really like, because we as architect, I mean, as students, I joined CNT as a trainee, and then I worked in CNT for 3 years. So the left hand side, I claim it's CNT, and the right hand side is Mindspace, where we eventually worked after the thing split happened. But in between is something which you have for yourself, and that's your free mind, and that's the mind that allows you to grow. So it's a very nice depiction of what I really wanted to say, in terms of we had a strong foundation in whether it's CNT or Mindspace, working under Mohe, and, you know, working in a very process driven firm. What it allowed us was, now after 10 years, it allowed us to express ourselves the way we wanted to express, and that's something each one of you should start looking forward to. What you should really start looking is, try and understand what language, what kind of style, what kind of work really excites you, and start molding yourself in that direction. Start looking at how each style uh, kind of gives you that confidence, or, you know, shatters you down. So you will have your own, like, say, you could follow Zahadid for half a semester, you could follow Korea for another, but eventually you will try to find a balance of which kind of work really suits you. And that is also a process where you will start looking at it right from your first year to probably even 5-6 years of your practice, and that's when your strong foundations of design are built in, and then from there you start taking your design forward, or your wings, you know, you start flying high. So just to sum it up, I mean, whatever I've said, what's a what is a concept? I mean, of course, it's an idea, but I've always believed that it's a layer of all this. It's a layer of form, context, light, climate, function, topography, client, contractor, vocabulary. So it's almost like, you know, you put all these layers, and each of these layers start coming in at some time or the other. So you start off with a small thing. You start off almost like planting a seed, and then, you know, you keep watering it with all these things, and eventually the whole tree starts growing, taking shape after 2-3 years, and that's the build form. So that's your building, and it just doesn't end there, because, you know, it's how the building gets occupied, how the building gets used, how people start using it. All that is combined, and then it's a closed box of that concept for that particular building. So it's very important that, you know, what you start with, you develop it at every stage. Many a times as students, when the teachers say to us, oh no, it's not working out, or it's or they start questioning, cross questioning you, please don't go and change that idea completely. So one day you have a courtyard as your concept, the next day when you come back you'll say, oh, I don't have a courtyard, I have something else as a concept. No, if you have started with a courtyard or you've started with an idea, probably you've not been able to convince the jury or your teachers on that. It's purely boiling down to that, because even when we practice, we have to convince a client. So if you're starting with a concept and the client comes and tells us, no, I didn't like the whole project, it's not like he has a this of he's not sure of your idea only because you have not been able to convince him completely. Or I would put it very bluntly, he'll say that you yourself were not convinced about that idea, so you didn't put in that effort to convince him. So that's something which is very important in terms of understanding what your idea is and how to convince, because architecture is about convincing the other guy, it's about selling your idea. So you have to be a good salesperson. So when you have everything of this inbuilt, like when you start with the idea, it eventually has to boil down to a good design. And this is a question that probably it's much more bigger question than probably what a concept is. But if you start with a concept and end with a design, then that good design is what you have to end with. And what is it that is good design? So this is something that we follow, that good design is when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So it means that you have to be able to do almost 100% justice to the kind of work that you're given, come up with the idea, find the right solution which lasts long. And to do that, probably we have developed a few concepts for ourselves, and these are the broader concepts that we look at when it comes to every project. So we try and keep the project as simple as a simple solution to the problem that has been given to us, because when you have simplicity, that's the most easily understandable, and that's something which looks very nice to the eye. So even if it comes in terms of Gandhi, and I think most of you had attended this lecture, I'm not going to go earlier, but the way Gandhi lived his life, he was one of the most simplest forms of in terms of life as well as in terms of fashion. So he just wore a cloth which wrapped around himself, and that became a fashion statement for the whole country. And the way it's so nice to see the way that he's depicted even now is in a very simple form. It's just a line, and that's something nice, because many a times if you have to depict Nelson Mandela or any of the top leaders, you would really sketch them, but when it comes to Gandhi, you just have to show that. I think sometimes you just have to show the spectacles, and you'll immediately recognize that it's Gandhi. So being simple is the most difficult thing to do, but I guess when it's simple, it attracts a lot of people, and it lasts longer. So when I say it lasts longer, you look at Mies's chair or Baba's chair, they're still available today. But if you look at Corbusier's chair, which was very intricate, it's not available. And the reason being that it's because it was simple to make, it was simple to basically it was simple to make, and it was a very simple materials that were wrapped around, and the design itself was very simple. It can be replicated any day, and it has lived its life. Basically, it's timeless. So a simple design has to be having longevity, adaptability, maintainability, and functionality. So all these features have to come in, and that's when with a simple solution you can solve a problem. And Mies does it well with his designs, architectural designs as well. You look at Barcelona Pavilion, or you look at Tadawando's church. They are also simple solutions to a problem that was given to them. Or even this San Padora's temple. I mean, it's a very simple intervention in this whole landscape. So that's what I said. It's the most complicated skill to be simple, because you really need to know how and what to add or what to remove. And with simple, you really need to be contextual. So when you design for the place, it's very important to understand the context that you're designing in. So you could be designing in Goa or Kerala, where you really need to leave those wide lanes and wide openings, because it needs a lot of cross ventilation, breeze going in from one house to another. The plots are bigger, so you are allowed to do that. But you just go up north and you go to Rajasthan, you can't afford to leave large gaps between buildings, primarily because the sun is harsh. It's at the altitudes of the sun are straight, and most of the times you need to walk in shadows, so you really or shade. And that's why you'll see Jaisalmer or Jodhpur, all this, Udaipur also, the houses are very close to each other. It's almost like each one tries to shade the other, and in between those houses those walkways also get shaded for most parts of the day. So and the other, if you see even some of the Sindh houses where they have these wind catchers, where they really need to get in, because of the cold climates, you really need to get in the uh, wind or exhaust the wind depending on the climate. So that's a typical section of Jaisalmer. If you look at it, it's so nice that people earlier used to build considering the climate. So you go to any of this eastern, I mean, sorry, the western, northwestern states, and you will find buildings which are as close to each other. And exactly the opposite happens in Ladakh. When you go to Ladakh, all your buildings, all your time, you would have been told by your professors to orient the buildings to the north. In Ladakh, they orient the buildings to the south, because if they start orienting it to the north, you will never get the north light, uh, enough sun. So they have to orient, because the temperatures are varied. They have to orient it towards the south, and that's the beauty of our country, because each state allows you to design very differently. Each state allows you to come up with a totally different concept. If you go to Assam, you have to live, or any of these northeastern states, you real, because the rains are high, the terrains are sloping at high angles, water goes down, so you really need to lift the buildings up and start putting them on pegs. So there are enough clues for you to take concepts from the nature and from the site that you're designing in. And people like Korea started exploiting it in terms of the way they design their buildings. I mean, we were all talking about uh, traditional architecture, and then you see the way Korea used it. He used breeze to pass through most of his buildings. They were porous, and that's something which, as a country, we can afford to do, because we are a tropical country. If you just have roof on top of you and you allow the breeze to go from one end to another, your temperatures can come down. That allows you to puncture your forms start becoming very porous, and you have this shaded spaces within the building. Another thing that you start looking when you're saying contextual or being true to the place that you're designing, you add a layer of how architecture can evoke your senses. And a very simple idea of going to the temple itself makes it much more interesting. So you start looking at the touch, you'll start looking at smell, you'll start looking at taste, you start looking at the bell. So each of this, if you look at it, has a reason why you're made to go through that whole process of going to the temple. Now imagine that the same thing happens in your buildings that you design. So you choose the correct material for your field. You choose probably the breeze to blow in the right direction. I'm not sure how taste could be done, but at least the sound could be taken care of. Sight, how the sun moves in, skylights, light coming in. So there's a lot more to kind of play with when, if you try and understand how sensitive or how you sensitize your five senses are as a part of architecture. And that's something which our temple architecture found out. They knew, they were masters in it, and they managed to do it. We could do it the same way in our houses, or we could do it in our public buildings, and that's something which you can start looking at. Even in terms of the way the temples are arranged, the way the uh, it starts taking your eye line to the from a lower level, and then suddenly it starts going up. You have ways which our temples are arranged, the courtyard sizes. They're never clean linear alleys. They will always have this projection. So if you see in the right slide, you see this, it's not like a long corridor. You always have this thing coming in and then going out, and that is primarily done because if you're standing somewhere here or behind, your eye should start moving only along this and then start going up. So that's something which you can start studying. So there's a lot of study involved in terms of, I mean, research which as students you need to do to understand, to come up with forms or come up with layers or come up with materials. And the same, the intensity of light inside the temple, the kind of columns, the that fall in. So there's a lot of learning to do when you study temples. And the same thing goes when we talk about the Vastu Purush Mandala, where most of our houses or most of our buildings were designed around the central courtyards, whether it's Bengal, or whether it's Maharashtra, whether it's you know um, Chettinad down south. It's just that the scales changed. So these are few of the traditional elements which are even prevalent today. Because when you start designing, you could start looking at that as your initial idea and move ahead. And depending on the scale of your project, you could vary it, and the intensity of light as well as the volume that surrounds it could be varied. The way it is articulated also could be varied. The next thing that also excites us in terms of our practice is light, color, and texture. Light is very important to us because, I mean, not only traditionally, but even in terms of our practice, because we look at light as almost another building element, and which you can do because light has that quality of being very dynamic. And then when it starts falling on surfaces, and whether it's horizontal or vertical, there are totally different ways that it starts behaving, and the whole complexity or the dynamics of the place completely changes. And to add to that, the shadows that fall on the ground, or the way the shadow patterns start receding or enlarging, it's very dramatic. So that's something which we should always look forward to. Color is very important. And then when light falls on texture, different textures make it even more interesting, because you'll see the undulation in light, you'll see the clarity and the darkness of light. So these are multiple layers that you can start adding to your initial idea. And I'll probably, when I go to our projects, I'll explain how we do that. This is very favorite to me because this is something which is very personal, and in terms of what we learned in our practice as well, when we were working with Mohit, the idea of absorption and elimination. And we as a country, we might feel as much chaotic as we are, but the way we are in those, that chaotic disorder, we have some sense of order. So I always call it order in chaos. uh, and you will go to this, if you go to the streets or you go to any of this markets, you'll see the same way that guy will come in the morning, arrange the same, like if you go to this vendor, the colors will be in the same position, what he wants, it's all orderly placed according to his requirement. And that's what we are. We will have everything on that plate, whether it comes to food. It might feel, for an outsider, it sometimes feel it's so chaotic, but if you look at it very closely, you can really start relating on how the process of eating is itself made possible by the way the plate is arranged. And this forms, whether it's Gujarati thali or whether it's South Indian thali, have a very unique way of arranging stuff. And that's very interesting to study, because that's the way the process of eating also starts happening. And that same thing comes into in terms of the way we look at our walls, where we have memories associated with it. But if you look at the West, then the wall will just have one feature and one what do you call, just one element on it. But we can put multiple elements on that same wall and still make it look okay. And that comes to us, like that whole individuality or the sense of ownership comes to us naturally. So we tend to do something for ourselves, whether it's in the form of a motive on the house, or even in terms of your desk where you work in your college. You will have your own personalized space. Maybe you'll put a photograph of yourself or as a kid, or where you have gone, you would put up a memory of it, or some friend has gifted you something, you will put it up. So that's personalization of space. And that is so important to understand how we can personalize that. And especially when we are doing houses, you really need to know how you can personalize that space. And how, again, I mean, however chaotic this picture might feel, I always put this picture up in my present because for me these are like inspirations. You could have a constant order in things that need to be arranged, and however much your stuff that needs to be arranged, you could still have it in an orderly manner. And that personalization is not something which comes just because of economics. It can even come to as basic as the lower income group, or the middle income, lower middle income group, where you personalize your space. So somebody has written welcome, somebody paints Amitabh Bachchan, somebody paints Shah Rukh Khan on his walls. And that's the reason why I call a house is almost like a collection of memories for us. It's something that you take from, what, when you go around the place, you start collecting, and you need to find a space for these memories. So as an architect, you can always say, I don't want to put up this picture on this wall, but for the person who's going to live in it, it's a memory. So you really need to find that balance between the architecture, correct architecture or good design, and balancing his memories into that place. So the last one of all this in terms of philosophy is timeless. And this is something which I've seen in so many buildings of a masters, whether it's Corbusier. Every time you go there, the mill owner's building, it's completely different. Either the plants are dried, you have fresh set of plants, or the concrete has aged differently. So it's always intriguing to see how different the building behaves every time you go. And I think we've all, like, I've grown up in about 20 years in IIM, and every time that in the 20 years, or probably every year that I've gone there, this space looks completely different. And the reason being that it's the stone has aged differently, the plants have grown differently. You'll see some creepers dying and then some other new plants coming up. It's a completely different space each time you go, and that's the beauty of space, which can be as timeless as this. So you never get bored in that space. So if you go to some of the new buildings which are designed as so form based, or have a very strong idea, they sometimes tend to be boring after the first visit. So if you, like, I remember when I'd gone to Dusseldorf in Germany, I happened to see this Franco Gehry's building, and I saw it on the, like, this was just after about first day I went and I saw it. And then I was leaving on the fifth day. I said, okay, let me just go in detail and see it again. But the fact that I could not stand there even for the next moment, I was bored. No, not even I was bored. I mean, there was something which was irritating me. But that never happened to me when I went to IIM or even IIM Ahmedabad. You always try to find something new in those buildings. So, when a building starts becoming timeless is when it ages well and it lasts longer. And even the occupants, whether, so IIM would have seen generations now, 6 generations of decades and generations of people studying here. But each one of them, whoever you talk to, you will always feel that they've always been seen something different. So I'll start going to our projects, because this was what we place our perspective in terms of our design philosophies or concepts that we go. They are broader concepts, and I'll just show you how we start applying it into our design. So this is a house that we did in Goa, and it was the initial idea itself was to make it very contemporary, yet deep rooted in terms of the place and understanding the climate as well. So when we say do a traditional house or follow the architecture of the place, it doesn't mean that you copy the style itself. You can still do a very contemporary modern building, keeping in line with the with the ethos of the place, and yet making it look fresh and new. And that's the way you generally find a new language for architecture. If Korea had to still follow what probably Mughals did, or the Hindu architecture was, we would have never had a modernist approach now. And similarly, as you go ahead. So this was a house where we had where there was an existing house and we had to build a house in front. So the challenging part was that the house was this was supposed to face either west or south because of the context, and there were views on these two sides. One was the paddy field and one was the mountains. But also, when you look at it in terms of Goa, that's the worst sides to face it. So we really had to come up with concepts where we could, prevent that from happening. So we started with a courtyard, which is again, as I said, most parts of the country still have, I mean, have courtyard as the primary thing. So we had this whole courtyard, and then we flanked all the activities around it. There was a backyard created basically to screen off the old house from the new one, and we could block that off. What we did was something which was as simple as just wrap around the building with a series of balconies. So that allowed us to protect the major part of the sorry, living spaces from the sun and the rain, more so from the rain, because June to probably September, you get really harsh rains and winds. So the rain almost comes in about 2.4 meters. So we tried to keep all these cantilevers of the balconies about 2.1 to 2.4, so that the bedroom walls or the family room walls don't actually get the heat. Another interesting way of to look at the building was to create this terrace on the southwest. Was also again the same reason. So you had this rooms. So even if the water, this is the harshest part of the site. Even if water or sun comes in, it doesn't penetrate into the living spaces, and the courtyard still remains shaded, or the other northern side still remains shaded. So that's typically what we did. This is the wraparound balcony which ran on the west and the uh, south. And then another interesting thing that we did was there was a road here and there was fields at the lower level. So idea was that if you're going to put glass onto this side, we wanted to still capture the view. So we raised the building up in the front, and you had the lawn. So if you're sitting here and if the person is walking on the road, they can't see you, but you can still get the visual connect to the to your paddy fields on this side. And this is the one which starts screening in. What also we did was try to create this wind hot air shaft which takes off the hot air from the place, the courtyard in the center, and all this rooms looking into it. So that's a basic section that came in. The idea was derived of that corridors running around was derived from this Kerala houses where you have the corridor as almost like a veranda, and you have the rooms which are recessed inside. So you still get the breeze from here. The roofs are low, and you can use this as a space, shaded space during the other parts. So maybe after September you can start using them, and that's how this house looks from inside. So you see this shafts which form. This is like a hot air shaft. We have turbines inserted, turbo vents inserted into the roof to cut down on the heat. And we still wanted a skylight. We've introduced acrylic rods into the slab so that gets in diffused light into the space. That's the rear. That's the behind. Sorry, that's the behind courtyard or the backyard. And then this space is a multifunctional space. Primarily, it was designed as a second family or a sitting space. But what it also does is during Ganesh Chaturthi, you could have gathering here, and you have the sliding windows which open up, and it opens into the lawn, and then this space becomes a multifunctional space. So there, the Ganesha festival or the Diwali festivals happen here. That's the living room which I was talking about. So if you're sitting here, you can only see the views, which of course we should have a better picture of this towards the fields. Those are the sorry. So those are the wraparound balconies. It's like, I don't know why this. Okay, so this is the living room, and you can see the fields there, but you can't see the road. So this is the southwest terrace which I was talking about. So even if the rain comes in for maybe 2 or 3 months, we don't use this. The other parts, it becomes a shaded space, a large space at the higher level. So that's the space. So the similar thing goes happens in community living when it's a larger community living, and this is something which Korea always talks about: the unit, the cluster, and then open space and the community space. And this is like the best theory that I've ever seen for a housing. And when you're what has happened today is because of this land constraints or the FSI is going higher. So we eventually end up being making units. If it's a row house, then it's units, and our common space is either a clubhouse or a swimming pool. So we have actually lost this whole transition from one small unit to a community center. And it's even more difficult when it comes to apartments, because how do you start creating those clusters, or how do you create that open space? So when we were given an apartment, we wanted to take the same concept on a vertical level. So we started with a unit, then we called a U cluster as a four unit zone, and then this community space large, you start looking at the cluster like that, and this is purely horizontal what I'm talking about. And then you have a large space. But when you start looking at it as a vertical uh, zoning, you tend to, if you go beyond 15 meters, you tend to lose the connectivity with the ground. So what we did was we inserted this, broke these clusters at higher levels and inserted this green spaces at various levels. So relatively, your green spaces relationship is kept at 9 to 10 meters, and then you have these gardens which start forming until you come down and into this larger space. So a similar concept which was used for a low density, low level uh, open space or the hierarchy gets moved to a vertical space. And that's what I call, like we were talking about, what is pragmatic or essence. And this probably falls in a pragmatic ways, because there was an initial idea, there was a function, and we still managed to get this. While the first project that I showed was probably a influence or a metaphor of that whole veranda system of a Kerala thing, interpreted in our own way. So we created this cluster. We had a central cores, and we started opening this open spaces in between, and then you move on to the larger green at the lower level. So this project is called Rohan Avriti. It's a group housing. We had the site which was like about 3 acres or so. So we tried to keep the minimum. This was the setback which we needed. So what also we did, so this is, you have a broad idea, now you come to the lower level. So I'm just trying to teach, probably show you how a process happens from starting of an initial idea, and then you move towards detailing that idea. We had two things to take care of: vehicular and pedestrian. So we completely segregated that out. We had the pedestrian at the higher level, the vehicular at the lower level, and the using a podium allowed us to do that. This would have been the blocks if we had to just place the requirements in terms of the FSI. What we did was, we split those blocks into 5 units. Each of them were clusters of 4. Put the cores in the center. Split those blocks even further. So this were like towers of 2 BHK with the cores in the center. And then started plugging in this third bedroom in more like a pattern. And the terraces of those became the garden spaces at higher levels, and also that strong central axis of movement at the higher level, the pedestrian level. So you kind of celebrate your entrance, you get in and you are overwhelmed with the scale, and then you enter your space. So the reason being is that in an apartment, when you design apartments or a housing, they're so typical that you don't have that sense of arrival. But when you create that sense of arrival, you are almost delaying that process of a person from coming back from work and going to his apartment, because once he reaches his apartment, you can go through all the apartments in the world. They are more or less the same, so they are almost like compartments. But the journey from when you enter this complex to your apartment door is the most relevant one. It's the most enjoyable one, and that's what we wanted to take it forward. So that's the master plan overall. I mean, I'll just go in faster. So we had the central pool and the water body in the center. So this is the section through the plaza, central space. So you come into a very ceremonial kind of a space, and then you climb up, go up, and then the scales are varied. What it does is, because this building is 45-meter long, tall, you are scaling down that whole mass to probably a human scale of 15 meters or 16 meters. And that's how you start entering. We had these existing trees which form the cover for it. Uh, you start going up. You have bridges. So this bridge actually serves as a purpose of going from one block to another, but the scale is kept to almost 3 meters, so that when you reach here, you really don't see that humongous scale of 45 meters. So you're actually cutting down the eyesight, and what you actually see is only this clubhouse in the end. Water which flows in from the water was used as a metaphor in this, and it's like a flowing water right from the pool. So this is the pool, and then it goes towards that back entrance. That was a bridge which you're seeing from the backside. You come into a central plaza. The central plaza is like this. Few things that we did was, again, between the blocks, if the pathway was running closer to the blocks, we extended the garden. We gave them extended gardens at the ground floor level, where the one, it served as a privacy between the building and the walking general public. And also what it did was, if you're walking at this level, you're not, this whole building is not like falling onto you. You are always at 3 meter scale, which is relatively a human scale. And then you see this, you start seeing these punches between the buildings. They become terrace gardens at higher levels. So this was what we were talking about. And that helped us to create the massing. So your form is also generated as a process. So then eventually you lead to the clubhouse, and then further from there to the amphitheater. So if the amphitheater is behind, we really wanted to keep even the clubhouse as porous as possible. So the ground floor is completely lifted for the clubhouse, with the pool, and then there's a deck there, and you can see what is behind. These are a typical, one is the squash court and one is the badminton court. That's how it feels from the sides. Also, what we did was, the service cores were kept on the rear. Like there were secondary streets, and those were called as the service cores. So those are the service cores, where you have kitchens and the toilets, shafts, and all happening. But at it's still, and those are the ones which are more shaded. Even in terms of the parking, we carried the same language. We didn't want to. Generally, stilt parking looks ugly because you see only cars. So we kind of created a pattern for the stilt in the openings. That's how the building looks. Skylines become very important. So we just stretch the building and put a double height pergola on top. So generally, when it's a high rise, you will see it from far. That is what is noticeable most of the time. So that creates an identity for the building. So if you are even at about 1 kilometer away from this building, you will still see this caps on top, and that forms an interesting skyline. So that's the skyline which you see from far. Yeah, so this is a project where we made a mistake. So this is a mock-up which we did for the same project which I presented, and the construction was happening, and we had to do this like a marketing office and a mock-up. So initially, when we were told to do the mock-up, we really didn't, though we were working on the same site, and this was in the setback, we never realized that there were such beautiful trees. So we gave them one plan, and that was how it was supposed to be placed. So we placed this building like this. But when we went to do the marking, we realized that there are trees falling into it. And that was a mistake from our side. We had, totally neglected this. But we quickly came back and we started reorganizing it. So we made where the cluster of trees were more, we called it as the court. And we just had this frames around it. We convinced the client that he need not have a large reception. He can have this courtyard as itself the reception, and then you have the built complex this side. So that's how that's the courtyard with its initial sketch of that. And this plane started going around those trees. So that's the entry. And this started becoming, as their informal gathering space, they would have meetings over here with the client customers, a little bit of water, and then all these trees were preserved. So that's from inside. So these frames are formed. Yeah, so this is the frame with the trees. And what was interesting was that during different times, because of that Gulmohar trees around, you would get this patterns on the like when it starts shading the flowers, you would get this pattern. So at some point, the courtyard used to be completely red with these white walls and ochre accents. So this was after we did this, we were a bit more smarter. This time we went to the site and saw that there were trees. This was another project that we were doing. This was an experience center, and this had coconut trees. So that's the larger project, and this was where we were asked to do this building. So we kind of, and also the land was sloping from here to down. So the road was at a higher level. And what was also important was that people, when they come, the customers come, they should not see this construction site, because since you're at the higher level, your eye immediately starts going towards the construction site. So we had to block that and start and create their, kind of trigger the eye movement towards this side. What was interesting was these trees were already there on a grid, and we had to, start looking at placing the building. So if you had to draw the section, it was like this. We had 3 meters. Eventually, even if we had put the building here, we would be able, when you're standing on top at the road level, you would only be seeing the roof. So as the idea was to create that kind of mystery as you go down and reveal the building as and when it happens. So we started with this steps which you start going down from the road. So you come into a plaza and then you start going down. And we kind of defined a path for them. So it was not like a straight path. So you walk, meander towards this and keep going down and then further down. And we placed the blocks without cutting the trees in this form. And what we also did is that meandering path, we gave almost like a direction. We inserted these walls. So that was something which could give them direction around the place. So that's the first part where you come in. That's the section. So what happens is, because of these walls, you either start seeing the trees on top or you start seeing down. So nobody actually starts realizing that there's a huge construction going on over here. And that's the stepped entry plaza. Then you have the plaza at the lower level. Then you have entry court. So these are various zones that we started creating. And then finally the model homes. And in between that also we had courtyard. So that was the initial sketch. And that's how you start your journey. You start coming down from the steps. So you have these walls which start giving you directions, and you get just a glimpse of what's happening behind. The walls are placed strategically between the trees. So you can look from one cut. So it's quite intriguing. It's quite mysterious, because you start looking, when you enter, you see a blank wall, and then from that opening, you see another tree. So this is what happens. Then you start seeing the shadows with water body and trees getting framed. And then you enter courtyards. That's how the courtyards look. Yeah, so this is one of the almost last. If you can tell me if your time, we can stop. Is it okay for another 10 minutes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So there are 2 projects. These are more. So all these 3 projects that you saw was from start. They were all projects which were already commissioned to us, which means that the client had already given us the projects. The next 2 projects are competition. And I purposely put this ones because the way you look at projects when it's a competition versus when the project client is already given to you, the project are totally different. Because when the client gives you the project, you have a clear-cut brief. You have more interactions with the client. The client comes, tells you exactly what he has his intent in his mind. But when it's a competition, which is more like your architecture's semester problems, you have no clarity or a thought process, or you don't even know whether it's going to definitely get built or not. So the thought process completely changes. So you will see in the way we have developed this, it is completely different in terms of the thought process. So this was a science gallery we were doing in Bangalore. It was a competition. And there were about 40 architects who participated, and then eventually they shortlisted about 10, and then they boiled down to 3, of which we were one of the 3 who were shortlisted. Eventually CNT won the competition, but the thought process was completely different for us. So this is a science gallery. It's on one of the main roads which leads to the airport from the MG road. It's I don't know if you all are familiar with Bangalore, but And this was supposed to be a prototype in, like, they was planning to put it in some 6 cities across the country. So the Bangalore was their first city that they were looking at. And having grown up in Bangalore for 20 years now, I realized one thing, that Bangalore doesn't really have a good public space. For us, a public space are pubs or restaurants, and we really need to spend for that. Or relatedly, it's breweries. So we have Cubbon Park, but even Cubbon Park, they start shutting it down, and there are a lot of restrictions. You can't just get in only on certain specific times. You need to get in. They barricaded some of this parks and all. So I thought a public building like this could trigger that lack of space that was urban realm that we talk about missing in it, and that's where we started. And this was something which I was talking about Sen Kapadia telling us to define an edge, and we were just going around with this idea of that edge. There was this whole musician called Yo-Yo Mama who talks about that edge effect in music itself, and how you can blend that. And it's quite nice. If you have a chance, just go and listen to his music and his translations of music. It's quite nice, and we tried to interpret that in architecture. So the edge effect, if we had to define it as in architecture, when you have two things, let's say a land and a sea, or land and water, it's always a distinct edge. Or let's say two user groups as well. We were just, in this case, we were talking about two user groups. It's a very definite edge. And then you start merging one into another. So what are the best possible ways that we tried to, illustrate with best possible 8-9 ways? And we realized that of all this, all of this were green and yellow, but I've just put this. This is where one space flows to another and it starts pixelating into each other, is the best way to, blur that edge. And that's what we were trying to look at in this project. We were trying to blur the edge between the artists and the scientists. So science gallery intention is to get the artists and the scientists together. So you create art with science, or science with art. So that was it. So we thought, if you have these two user groups, which are totally different, one is more theoretical, one is so much driven with numbers and experiments, and while artists can just paint what he wants for himself. So that's like a clear-cut edge. But if you could look at a building which starts doing that for you, where you start merging both of this together and making them as one complete picture, then it's easy. And so we had this three definite things, where we had a zone of transition, we build less, basically, so that you have more outdoor spaces, and a public building has to be a place of transformation and movement, which means that you have to allow, that's why it's public. So you have to allow the public, whether, irrespective of whether he's coming to the building for to see something or not, he has to be able to move in from that building. So that's where we started. So this is what the edge effect was for us, basically the science gallery. So what was interesting was each of this really fell in place given the site that we were. And let me tell you, this concept came in before, not after we did the design. So this is the built mass. We tried to restrict the built mass as much as possible, but then we realized that, if we just do this, it is not going to suffice. So we had to spread the building around the existing vegetation. What was also interesting was there was a colony here, and there was a main road here. So we thought, if people used to walk along this, why not make this as a zone of transition? So you walk through the building to get to these two nodes which we had identified in the site. As I go ahead, I'll tell you. So that's the site. So we had this veterinary college, and then we had a group of housing over here. So all these people, to catch a bus, would walk through this road, and there was a bus stop here. So it's like going perpendicular to the site and going. So we thought, why not, if you have this whole idea of taking them through this, and in the process, they will be able to see what is happening, and then go eventually to their destination of catching a bus. So that was the first thing that started. This was transformation through movement, and that's what we did. We had this series of trees And as I said, if we had just kept a block, it was not possible. So we wanted to spread it out as much as possible. So we kind of built around the trees. Wherever the trees came, they became courtyards, and wherever there were no trees is where the building started forming. There were levels on site, so there was this bus towards the bus stop. So your journey would have been, you climb, you get in, and then keep going down, and then eventually to the bus stop. What we also did was that we took this idea of a shamiana. So if you go for this functions, you just have a shamiana, and then you have a lot of activity happening at the bottom. So that's the best way, because the breeze flows from the top, the bottom level. Everybody's kept cool because there's always a shade on top. So we interpreted that with sinking most of this galleries at the lower level. And even in terms of function, it helped us because galleries need less exposure to heat and moisture. So you can keep it at the lower level, and then keep the public spaces at the higher level, and almost make it like a statement to have a form which gets. So I think there was a question which said what follows what. So form follows function, or function follows form. And I always believed through the practice that form, it's not form versus function or function versus form. It's actually form and function, or function and form. So both have to go parallel, because if they don't go parallel, then you start doing cosmetics to your functions. And or if function follows form, then you start doing cosmetics to your function. So neither can be in place if they are looked at it individually. It has to go at simultaneously. It has to run back in your mind. So when you start putting the functions, your form has to start developing behind. And the correct way is to be true to the functions. The form will be developed if you're true to the functions without doing anything much, and if you have a very strong idea. We had sustainability as an idea. We kept the building open, puncturing, kept all this for the greens that were available to us. So we kind of had a section where you start climbing the building. This was the sunken portions of the buildings, and the top level was kept completely free. So that's the master plan. So if you are the red one denotes the pedestrian movement, which comes to the campus. Walks to the nodes, while the yellow one is the one which comes for a purpose. So these are ones which just walk past the building and go to their respective bus stop or this side road, while the yellow ones are ones who come to see the site. So we had these galleries in these different regions. There was an amphitheater. They wanted a theater. All that was sunk, and then amphitheater was raised on the top of the building. So if this is the pedestrian who has no business to come into this, he just walks through this, gets down, comes into the courtyard. There are a series of courtyards at the lower levels, gets out, there's a coffee shop. So what we did to trigger this movement was also to add a coffee shop at this level, and just in front of the bus stop. So, the coffee shop and this plaza becomes an extension to the bus stop. So people who are waiting for a bus just come in, have a cup of coffee, and there's a small retail shop as well. And I mean, if they just got down from the bus, it's also they can just walk through this building, through this. So the need to cut off this whole pedestrian movement was there. So, and best way to do it is by luring them with some incentive. And this is the lower level. So if because of the site, you come here, and that's the courtyard at the lower level, and then that's eventually the plaza. So from this side, we only saw earth berms going up. So if you're on the main road, you would not see anything else, but just see these lawns going up, and people could sit during evenings and have a cup of, could just be meeting a friend or, chit chatting. There's a lot of interaction spaces and things. There's the gallery on the top level. So that's the section that we developed. So given the site, you walk down, and at every point you had all these galleries or workshop which opened out into these open spaces. So a common man could also see it. The top level was kept for outdoor exhibition with just this tensile roofs at the higher level, and they form like a shamiana. So the idea was to surprise as you come in, allow people to participate. So we based our whole project on these 3 words, and then start connecting between spaces and connecting between activities. That's the cross section on the other side. So that's where that amphitheater, and below that was the theater. And this is the plaza towards the bus stop. So this is how it looked from top. So this is from the main road, where you just see these earth berms going up, and all you would see is the skylights or the fan lights over this, and then this canopies which rise above this level, and all the trees were grown from there, which were all existing. So this is the entry from the pedestrian. If you're coming from the campus, you come in and there are displays happening, and then you could have a performance happening. So they just wait over here if you're going to catch a bus, and if there's some performance, you could still see it, or keep walking down further. You, as the building is porous, so you allow breeze and air to come in, and air to have features, and people could sit there. This is when you start coming down and go towards the bus stop, there are workshops. The top level is the display. You could use all these walls to start becoming uh, you know as objects to hang or display artifacts or things that have been innovated. That's the coffee shop, and we tucked in the artist's housing below that, so nobody knows. So even if you come, you can come in from this plaza and get into your housing zone over here. So that's the section over here of the galleries. So that's the lower galleries, like that. That's the amphitheater. That's the other side one view. That's the top level. Yeah, so this is the last project. This is a project which we won in Goa. This is called JIPARD. JIPARD is an institute which trains IAS officers and does a lot of other Anganwadi workers, coaching and things like that. So when it was supposed to be a training center, and they wanted it to be something which is iconic. So when you look at iconic, you generally associate it with form. And this is the time when we said, okay, we will not associate it with form. We will try and associate with an ideology. We'll try and associate with the simplicity of the way the project itself is given, and iconic in terms of the spaces that are there. So we will just did a whole study of what they are into and how the functions work. So the initial idea was that it should be reflecting the state's traditional heritage. Now, Goa has a varied heritage. It has Hindu heritage, it has Portuguese heritage. So we were really in a dilemma what to take. So we thought the best way is to reflect the states, if we have to take the traditional part of it, is in terms of the climate itself and the way people have built, not, I wouldn't say temples or, not public buildings earlier, or not churches. So we thought there was this very classic example of a temple which is the Wailing Temple, which was a very vernacular, I wouldn't say vernacular, it's more like a temple built by people, and by hand, I would call it handmade. And it was built in somewhere around 15th century, and it's along the valley. So there's a hill on two sides, and you have a temple which faces the hill. So that's the temple there. And what's interesting about this temple, it's almost designed, if you see the temple, it's designed like a house. Even if you see the gopuram, it's a pyramid gopuram. So there's no way a temple or the sarthis, I think, yeah, sarthis they were called. Sthapatis, sorry, not sarthis, sthapatis would have done this. This is more of a hand-driven, like people of the village would have come together and built it. Also, what is interesting is there's this top of the hills are called kulagars. Kulagars are more like betel nut plantations, but they are basically to create a micro environment and also help in terms of erosion of land, and they kind of allow the water to channelize, and while the water is channelized, they're used for planting over here. So within this space, you kind of create almost like a microclimate, which is which is shaded, it has a low humidity as well. So we kind of use this principle, and eventually the water from the hill starts getting collected in the kund. Just excuse me, I think yeah, sorry. Yeah, so that was it. So we kind of mapped the nodes and patterns of movement and studied the site and what was existing. So that was the terrain. We had the slope at a high level, and you had all this land coming down. There were some existing buildings here, and also we had this series of coconut trees which were already planted in a grid, and we wanted to preserve most of this. There was only a pocket of land which was available for us to build without cutting most of the trees. So that's where we placed the institutional block. That's So the idea was to keep it as low scale as possible and not go more than ground plus one or maybe ground plus two, uh, ideally, so that the scale is kept as proportionate to the surroundings. So we use the similar concept of that into this as an edge effect, but slightly different. We wanted to keep the building as porous as possible. So we had the screens, and we had a central space which went through. The mass was broken. You had two differentiating masses. One was the public, one was the teaching or the institute part of it. We based it on space being rendered with light, water, wind, and land. So light, because light has a full power to, so we did a lot of analysis of how natural light travels through buildings. We tried to use jali walls, screen walls. So this was all the analysis that we did, and the solutions that we could come, large overhangs. So if you see, this was the section that we developed. There was an auditorium, so that the auditorium was completely separated out, and we had this as the open offices. Below that were the discussion rooms, and then classrooms were kept at the higher level with the public space here. So if you see the way the section works, we kind of relooked at the sloping roof itself, where we created the gutter within. Otherwise, most of the times when you do sloping roofs, the gutters look ugly. So in concrete itself, we tried to achieve that sloping roof like that. Because this was the western part, we needed a lot of screening, so there were screens on this. There was something which you called as the Bernoulli effect, where you allow the breeze to again go through a very narrow stretch, get it over plants and a slow water body. Then this area starts getting cooled much more, and then you have this exhaust at the higher level, and you start this that starts sucking the hot air. So that's the broad section, I mean the larger section of it. Water, we kind of preserved water. We were running a eco STP because there was enough land, and we could do that. There was a huge water lake kind of a situation that we created. So the entire water ran through series of tanks and then came down to a larger tank, which almost is like a lake. And we didn't use drains. We concept was not to use drains, use swales, which are natural drain channels, to take the water down. Yeah, so few sections. That was the master plan, where you have the lake in front, the parking, and then that's the institute block itself, and then further down is the existing buildings. That's the cross section of how rain is prevented. In fact, what we did interesting was that these were the corridors. We allowed rain to come into this area. So because of that, so even by doing that, what clearly happened was that even if you're sitting in the classrooms, you can see the rain coming on both sides rather than just one side. Wind, I mean, that stack effect that I just told, the filler slabs, ventilations. I'm just going a bit fast because yeah, so these are few images where you came in, and then we created that kulagar in the center. So those are the images of the kulagar inside. A artificial lake was created where this becomes the rainwater harvesting thing. And this is how I was talking. The roof is an interpretation of the sloping roof. And the inspiration was Baba's own office, where you have that roof coming and the water getting down. And the scale is, of course, increased because it's a public building here. But that was the initial inspiration that we took from, and then developed this roof, which is a sloping roof, but it looks like a funnel because of the way it is designed. It looks a bit more contemporary than in the traditional sloping roofs. Classrooms, plans, at various levels. That's a master plan. Then you have the institute, various plans, various sections. This is when you enter the building. This is when you enter the building. This is how you go. That's the water body. I'm talking about. There were some few rooms at the higher level. That's a double height entrance. This has gone through a little bit of revision as we are going in for tender. There's this staircase which takes you straight up. So even in terms of layering, what we had done was the institute part was kept at the first floor level. So person coming to the institute can walk in straight up and go to the top level, while the public spaces are kept at the lower level. So this is when you enter. That's the split in the skylight. I mean, sorry, in the roof. That those two are the sloping roofs, and that's what you see is the hot air exhausts over there. That's bridges which start connecting spaces between. That's the lobby. This is again derived from the blogger concept. So you see water, a little bit of channel. So what during the monsoon there will be water in it. During non-monsoons it will just be a gravel, and but it'll still have these plants. And then you're sitting in between the discussion rooms. The corridors are open with just a shed on top, so you'll never get water nor light. I mean, harsh light onto it. It's more like an outdoor indoor kind of a concept. Yeah, so that's if I had to draw that conceptual, when we had seen that conceptual section, this is the view of it, of the same section looking back towards the reception. That's the courtyard behind, which forms a small amphitheater. So we used the land as well, where we cut some and filled. So the land was actually sloping, it slopes down like this. So this part of the building is at a higher level, while this part is at a lower level. And that is negated by this use of amphitheater and steps at this level, or even in the front. So that's the courtyard from behind. And you see again, most of these corridors are kept open with this. Even in terms of volume, when you're designing public spaces, you tend to do this. You should tend to do this volumes, double height, single height volumes, because that's when that interesting play of space starts happening. Then it becomes magical. That's the canteen from the other side. So also the placement of the canteen was in such way that there was that internal road, so even people from outside could come and use it. So you tend to increase the footfall of the public building by allowing something like doing something like this. That's the canteen from the other side road. This was the elevation on the west, where we had a pattern of jalis going through. And because we had this shallow sloping roofs, you really don't see those sloping roofs. They just become a part of the form going. That's the secondary entry from the other side road. That's the main road what I was showing. This is the secondary entry. We had an existing tree there, so we kind of used that tree and created an entryway with the tree growing through this central large double height space. That's the institute with the classrooms. So a very different kind of a facade there. That's the internal from the top level. So that same section from the top level, and then this is from the last, above the lobby bridge. That's the overall. So you see this. So it's a combination of flat roof and sloping roofs. Of course, this has also gone through a bit of change now. Because of the tender and things like that. This was just before the tender what we presented. But yeah, it has gone through that little bit of attrition. And so that's the main road. This is the secondary road. And that's the water feature. So we have this channel coming down all the way till here. Yeah, so that comes to the end. So while I was saying all this, your inspiration can come from anything. So you need to really keep your eyes open. And I've always believed that you need to sketch, whether it's your plan, whether it's your 3Ds, even just as you go on a bus or you're traveling somewhere, just try and sketch something. And then you never know where and how an idea can change your perspective towards design. So there's a lot that you can do. I remember when once Mohe had sketched a groundnut shell, and eventually he did a building out of it, just as a sketch. He maybe have never built it, but it just they say your creative juices start flowing, and that's something which is very important. So the thing that when you put your pencil to paper, is when you have a direct contact with your mind and your hand. And that is the most important part of your architecture. And that's when your mind starts thinking, and you skip a heartbeat, your line will go slightly teared up. You will get that initial idea, and most of the sketches that you see are more like initial ideas. So if you see this was for another public competition and was just the first sketch. Eventually we did the building almost more or less like this, or we generally work with sections. So for a house, this was a first initial section that I did, which later on got built and was executed. Or when it came to a facade of the same house, it was a sketch that was done like this. So this is something that you guys need to understand, that the best form of developing a concept or developing any inspiration is always sketching and or scribbling. So never lose that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It has been really great. It was an amazing presentation, and I am very sure that all of us present here now have a much better understanding of how to go through the process of concept development. And all thanks to you. And also, I'm very sure that our curious audience is having so many questions and queries and things to discuss with you growing up in their minds. So on the right side of your screens, you can see the Q&A box where you can hit up with your questions. Audience?
So there's actually few of them in the chat box itself. So starting with the first question, there is a question from Muskan Gupta. She's asking, where would the line of difference lie between where building is one of them and had been derived from an analogy or another one, which takes us back to the first slides which you shown to us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a very interesting. When I was putting this presentation, I was trying to find what could be analogy, and that's why I included the second slide. If you see that palace versus the housing thing. So an analogy, a direct analogy could be like the face house, or in fact, it could be the fish. Good, bad, ugly is up to you to decide. But a metaphor is always a better way than an analogy, because in the metaphor you're not resembling it directly. You are getting inspired and deriving maybe a form or a function, or together function and form with it, and that's something which is much better than a direct analogy. But having said that, an analogy can still be taken in the right way if you look at the second slide. So you could have a section of a building which is used for a different usage. Now, if you see the project that we did, the science gallery, there is like, I think Toyo Ito or someone, as one of those Japanese architects, has done something similar. So it was derived from that whole idea of the landform itself being modulated and the building going down. It's not something that I have invented. It's not rocket science, and I've not invented it. But it's an analogy of some already existing building, maybe for a different user, but you could use it for yours. And that's the thin line between analogy and of that face house versus an analogy of using a section to or a build space to your project. So that's again a thin line between inspiration and getting copied. So that's something that you should be aware of.
Also, Arnav Dasor has a question for you. How shall one work out what typology of concept best suits their project, client, and the site as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think typology of a concept is based on the person, the architect itself. So as you had philosophical, theoretical, and the other practical concepts, I think your design philosophy or your vocabulary tends to decide it for you. So if you ask me between Korea and Doshi, and Guha, you look at Guha, Hussein Doshi Gufa, um, and this, let's say, Gandhi Smarak. Both are based in Ahmedabad, both by two different great architects. But if you study Hussein Doshi Gufa, the way he has mystified it with saying that there's it's almost like a serpent, and there was that cosmic energy, and so there's a lot of theory gone to it. While Korea was very practical, Doshi was very theoretical, while Korea was very, very practical, if you see it. And his concepts were the mandala, and then, or maybe that nine squares and modularity when it came to Gandhi Smarak, with a very simple. He just thought that Gandhi was very as simple as possible, so the building and his Smarak has to be also very simple. So that that again, that's what. So it depends on what and how you are as a person. And I think after you graduate and start working somewhere and you start developing your interests, you will realize that maybe your concepts could be much more theoretical. If you had, it's very simple. If you had asked somebody else to present the same presentation, it wouldn't have been the same. So every architect develops his vocabulary, his way of working, his style, his development of concepts very differently. And that's the most, and that's probably the best interesting part of our profession. Two things can never be the same.
Also, Shri Shinde has a question. Again, I think it's on the same notes. How can we establish a balance between theory and practical concept?
I, I don't know whether it's, I mean, theory and practical. See, what sounds practical to you might be a theory to others. As simple, like today when you're looking at it from the other side, and I was a student sometimes. So when probably I keep repeating because Korea used to teach in our college. So when he used to keep presenting, we used to find that he was so theoretical. But when we came out and we started practicing, it was only when we realized that he was as practical as possible. So it's a matter of time that you students should not get too worried about what is theory and what is practical. Probably what you really need to understand is how to go about the process of design. So if, say, let's say, a project like a school is given to you in a particular area. Let's say you're given a project in Pune versus you're given a project in Nagpur or Kolhapur. Each of these places have a different context. First is the macro level context of the place itself. So Pune has a different way of looking at project, or Kolhapur has a different way of looking at a project. Then you come to the micro level of the project itself. So when you're looking at the micro level, maybe the site is sloping. In some areas, it is crowded. So all that has to be taken into into your design philosophy in terms of what you start designing with. And overall, then you take a smaller idea. Let's say you're designing a school. So if you're designing a school, what is your first idea of a school? You would say, okay, I want the kids to interact. I want a lot of open spaces. I want spaces where you could play. And how different are those spaces going to be from what has already been done? How can it be different? What is the size of the courtyard? So many a time students take courtyard as their concept, but eventually when they start designing the courtyard, either the courtyard is linear, it's small in scale. You have two walls coming at 3 meters apart. So that understanding of scale is very important, and that comes with just drawing sketches and saying, okay, for a courtyard between two classrooms, maybe I need that size. It's okay to take a courtyard as your concept. I mean, it's neither practical nor theoretical. It's a very simple idea of rooms revolving around a central space. But what is that character of that central space is something that you will add to it, by maybe by form or by the way you treat the courtyard. You could have a courtyard in which you look down into, or you could have a corridor all around it. So those are things that you start deciding, and that That's the line between theory and practical. And there's nothing called as theoretical and practical. At least don't get caught up in this right now, because as students, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Because you could do a very theoretical concept and may not be able to execute it in your design. You could talk about. I remember there was this whole uh, student who said that he was doing this. Yeah, he was doing this one building, and he said that I went to the site, and there's some I felt that the tree was actually coming down on me, and I really wanted to do something like that. There was, again, it was a whole talk of energy and things like that, but eventually it has to be shown in your design. How would you show it? You can't just put one whole tower going up some 20 meters and say that is the one which is leading you to the cosmic energy. I mean, that's not fair. I mean, that's like you are trying to justify. But if you had seen a site and you have the view and you have levels, and then you step it up, or you take terraces as your garden level, or you put the building down, those are concepts which are a mix between your theory and practical thing. So there has to be a balance. There can't be just one way. If you think something, you have to be able to implement it. If you can't implement it in just a book, it's okay for a book.
It's true. So next, Hassan Kotari has to say how to go forward with the ideas which I have in mind. In my personal case, it also happens. I present something and it's completely thrown away based on the faculty comments. How to get over it? I think he relates very much with your experience with Zain Kapadia.
Yeah. So see, I don't know what context the teachers have thrown it out, but in my context, today when I look back at it, it was trash. It was worth. If I was on the professor's side, I would have done the same thing today. So, many a times our ideas are premature, or as a student I'm talking about, or even as architects, sometimes we are not able to get to a mature idea. So you really need to, go back, sit and introspect for yourself. Can I really look at the idea differently? Or what did the professors mean? I mean, I would like to put it like that. Did they not like my idea, or did they not like my implementation of the idea? This Louis Kahn always said this. He said that architecture starts with being intangible, becomes tangible, because that's when your drawings start, and then when the building is built, it becomes again intangible. Which means that you start with a myth, it becomes a reality, and once it is actually built and the way the building behaves, it's completely intangible. So you are only in the process of right now of the second phase, where it has to be tangible, basically, which means that it has to be a technical drawing at the end of it. So the journey from being that first level to the second level, what you need to understand is, how does my concept or my initial idea get nurtured to become a tangible? Now you could take, like, very simple, you could take the lotus or a fish or a groundnut and do your building. Fair enough. But does that building really, I mean, that's what I understood when Sen Kapadia, does that building really demand that? If yes, a lotus is okay for a meditation center, but a lotus for a hotel is not, because it has practical problems. If you are able to do it, you're a genius. If you are able to fit the functionality in a lotus, you're a genius. So Sydney Opera House cannot be let's say it can be a restaurant, if at all, but it cannot be a theater. I'm sorry, no, it cannot be a housing. Can a Sydney Opera House be a housing? No, it can't. That's where the line has to be drawn. So your concept or initial idea has to be in conjunction with what you have been assigned to. So remember that as an architect, though we say it's an art form, it always has a client attached to it. It has a budget attached to it. and it has a functionality attached to it. So that is why it's so important that when an artist paints, he takes up his brush, he can just have three brush strokes and call it a painting. But you take up a pencil and you draw three lines, it will not be called as architecture. So that it requires that closing of those gaps between those lines properly to develop an architecture. I don't know whether I gave you too much of gyan, but
nahi, sir.
confuse
Definitely.
you more.
It's always amazing to get more and more knowledge about these things. Yeah, so I guess I have covered most of the questions here, and those which felt repeated, I've skipped those. And Durga Pavamana, I think you have something to say. You've raised your hand.
No, I think that was my mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So, yeah, sir, I think those are all the questions they had. And I hope you all had your satisfactory answers. And I must say, you've all been very great, amazing audience. And because you all have been so cooperative throughout, we have a certain surprise element planned for you all at the end. So, just a second. Yeah. So, this surprise element basically, you'll get to know about it at the end of the seminar. So, just stay tuned, hang in there. And meanwhile, I would request Siddhant sir, who is also the co-founder of 361-bit, to deliver today's vote of thanks.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you. A big thank you to you to keep this and this seminar so cheery and making this very much interactive and lively. I must mention our deepest sense of appreciation for Swapnil sir for this his explanation of what concept is, the layers, and how we can segregate them into utter simplification. I'm sure all of us learned today that many a time there might be complex things, complex problems which we need to face, but there's always an approach to simplify it and resolve it. On behalf of all the other participants, I would like to express my gratitude to you, sir. We are much honored to have you here today.
Thank you.
As the name suggests, conceptual paradox have an unlimited bundle of strings which are unresolved, and we can have unending discussions as well. But unfortunately, we are constrained by the time. However, I believe today people must have gained the perception on how to approach the problems, how to develop concepts holistically in design, and altogether, it's just a beginning of exploration in the ocean of ideas, while steadily sailing through it, intrinsically applying them. An event like this demands a constant workforce, of course, to keep it up to the mark. And for that, we are fortunate enough to have a backbone of such an indispensable team. I'm very thankful to our team for taking all the efforts necessary whenever needed. And last but not the least, I'm immensely grateful to our beloved audience for allowing us to make this all happen. It was great having you all here. Now, regarding the activity, inspired by the edge effect which Sir just told us and shared his insights with that, we have arranged a similar activity like that so it could spark up your mind. And an addition to this is you can just create these sketches. Pooja will explain it to you, and you can just put it on your Instagram story and tag us. For those who are unaware of the username, it's at the rate 361.bit and bit is in small letters. We will reshare it in our story so that we could reach out and share it to everyone who is connected with us. Hence, towards the new beginning, Pooja, you can hand over you can take it over from here.
Yeah. So I think we have a screen to present here. Okay, anyways, I'll just explain what the activity is. Yeah, there's the screen. Just a second. So, basically, we have this activity to tickle your minds, your creative minds. So the activities, you just have to consider any solid, two solid forms. This could be cubes, pyramids, spheres, cuboids, anything you prefer. And considering these two perfect forms, you have to sketch as many as interactions you can make between the two forms. And that would actually be very interesting to know what your creative mind goes, what's your lookout into that. And finally, after you've done with your design, you have to post it on your Instagram stories. And please do tag 361-bit on your stories so that we'll be notified whenever you answer. And we will surely view all your stories, and the winner gets to have a shout out on the official Instagram page of 361-bit. So I hope you are all up for it. And we are really eager to know your designs on what this problem is. So yeah, stay safe, take care. And for more such interesting webinars and information, stay tuned to 361-bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I mean, thank you for being an amazing audience and having patience to listen for 1 hour. It's okay. Yeah, thank you. By an amazing work, guys. What you guys are doing, because I guess at the student level, I as a student, we never had this kind of platforms where we could have people coming and presenting and explaining things to us. I mean, if anytime you guys need any help, please reach out. I'll be more than happy to help. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.